Listen to this. You're not going to be able to read it. If you can, it's not very easy to read. So go back in the day, some computer nerds made machines that would take in a bunch of outside data, process it, and try to predict the future. To fund it, they predominantly sold the information to people who wanted to buy and sell stocks. Enough people started doing this that they started making the machines send out stock reports themselves, which other machines took in as data to further sell, buy, and report on stock themselves. Okay? Machines talking to machines about stock movement. This eventually created a massive feedback loop of stock data being managed by autonomic intelligence, not the same as artificial intelligence, that outright blocked out the human element. And right now, the open secret is that the market is out of human control. If anyone tried to remove these data loops, even one out of sync chain link could cause the world economy to collapse overnight. You following me so far? So he continues. Anon does. So basically, in tandem with this technology, the internet happened, and a load of marketers started moving to content marketing, which is the idea that the product and the marketing are the same thing and that you're selling a lifestyle story, which is why if you pay attention, most companies that used to just sell a product have made massive investments into media space. This is fine in and of itself. The 1980s had a similar version of this. The problem is that the easy proliferation of consumer data reaches these autonomic intelligences, and they begin to report on what kind of narratives that sell versus which ones don't. Simple, right? Well, not really. You see, we live in a post-hypernormalization world, a Soviet term for propaganda that keeps things that keeps things are some that keeps things that are something that we are. This is written wrong. Propaganda that keeps things are something when the reality is different. That's a little awkward right there. When you mix in marketing and propaganda with feedback loops, and the propaganda that keeps and on top of that, that Google ad programs that essentially bubbles people into feedback loops, pretty much why you get all of those Google ads on the side that are related to things that you have typed in, searched, spoken out loud about, all those weird shit. And those bubbles people into feedback loops and only give them what they want to hear. So you can sell them something. It basically creates mass psychological dissonance between different groups of people that consciously or not have their life's context formatted around them by media narratives. It's one reason why the social justice stuff is hitting so hard right now, back in 2017, despite the fact that America is an otherwise pretty prosperous country with no major problems causing anyone to starve. Anyway, the implication is that you can basically have cultural narrative context being created by literal abstract machinations who may or may not be intelligent. That's no good because there's no moral parameter to stop the data from trying to get everyone to kill each other. You see, people keep thinking the robot revolution's going to be Terminator. It's going to be more like The Shining, which is that's fucking scary, like that Ghost in the Machine kind of a thing. There's more. We're just going to keep up with this. There's two more big ones. So people have their lives contextualized by inhuman machinations, which, okay, it's pretty bleak, but not outright destructive, right? Just a bunch of consumers being taken for a ride, right? Well, no. You see, the consequence of religion, more or less, falling out of style in the public consciousness is that there's no longer a single common cultural narrative. So you just don't get to see Tim at Sunday school, so what? Well, the larger point of contention is that there's always been a considerable percentage of any population that gives way to fanatic behavior, which in antiquity usually means religious fanaticism. But if the narrative of religion is weakened, and the only other alternatives to narrative are automatically generated content marketing narratives too shallow to really make a lifestyle out of it, you run into a phenomenon where a percentage of the population essentially migrated between the brands and the pseudo-idolatrous methodology. So they're talking about social justice and how you get caught into these ridiculous social loops. That is the new product, and it's all being perpetuated by these online echo chambers that keep feeding into each other because they are designed to pick up data, to replicate it, and to pass it along. Except the religious ones actually at least try to offer the illusion of being beneficial to society at large, while the autonomic models are there purely for profit and other hedonistic sensory overload and compensate for any shallowness. Did you ever stop to think about how we live in a world where a bunch of people do crazy shit over cartoons, harass people, send death threats, sell cars for sauce, etc.? Do you really think that that's just normal behavior? No, of course it's not. Those sorts of people would have been in a fucking monastery a couple of 100 years ago. They're fanatics, pure and simple. Nothing wrong with being a fanatic if it's constructive, but these narratives don't have that interest in mind. So here's the last piece. To put it bluntly, we quite literally live in a society where abstract mathematical formulas are in charge of a market that pretty much doesn't sell products anymore and is more focused on selling narrative scams based on the perimeters from these algorithms. And a bunch of wackos who in another lifetime would have been witch burners, who have nothing to spiritually satisfy their intrinsic obsessive tendencies, are replacing a common cultural narrative with many different smaller ones in different tribes, which is how you end up with Nazis and commies in a prosperous capitalist country thinking the end of the world is next week, literally creating their own problems. One could argue that we have too much freedom of choice when it comes to information about narratives, and it's actively harming the society. The Russians use avant-garde technique in their propaganda to give their population so much bizarre data to sift through that they just conform with no real goal in mind. The Chinese just censor and have less overall data fed to their population, but Americans simultaneously have too much data and too little diversity in the data, making it easy for context to corral them into a specific mindset. And all it takes is a pair of eyes to see that the current mindset for American populations is apathetic versus messiah complex murderousness. The silver lining is that I think that these marketers don't know that they're playing with fire. I don't think it's entirely out of the question that someday, soon, a crowd of angry people will actually lynch content creators, not for towing their own narrative complex, and soon they may begin to live in fear. People think this sexual harassment stuff is a big happening, but I think it's only going to be a drop in a larger bucket. That will be the 2020s. If not apocalyptic, they'll be interesting times. Now, why did I bring that up? Because that's another part of the mind control. We all know that these feedback loops and these bubbles are out there, and we all know that we have been so saturated with information. You probably have friends that have contacted you about every little thing, that every celebrity that has ever died is actually still alive. They're in a bunker somewhere. They're going to be returning soon. They have some intelligence they're going to drop on something. It is everywhere. It's everywhere. And like I always said when we've done this show, you can follow certain threads down so many different rabbit holes. But if you have something that binds you together, something that kind of stops all the outside noise and focuses you on a solitary issue, you can start taking care of a lot of problems all at once. Instead of having to convince people first about every detail of how you see 9/11 to have gone down. Instead of having to convince everybody first before any kind of progress could be made about some Zionist threat or one thing or another. That's really, or that the earth is flat, or that this, you want to talk about the shape of the earth, when really we can be talking about, hey, let's get control of our money again. Let's start putting bad politicians out on their asses. Let's start thinking locally again. Let's start saying fuck you to unnatural and immoral laws. If those things we really start commenting on, about ending wars, stabilizing money, then every last one of the boogeymen that people out there want to call attention to, and I'm not saying that calling attention to one boogeyman over another isn't warranted. And obviously, we do a lot of deep dives into certain theories, into certain hidden histories, and I love it all. And it's good to know that stuff, and it's good to just dig into it. But as far as being able to make any headway in the world where you're surrounded by normies, and everybody's following their own threads, that's that commonality. There's no common, and it's part of the psychological warfare cake, this multi-layered cake that we put out there. Not only are they working on it, working us over through the schools and through television in Hollywood, but algorithmically, things that you can't even feel. You might think that you're on the verge of figuring out the world's problems there because you went on another thread and you found some new information you want to bring to the fore. But where does it all get us? Further fractures people into their own little pockets of investigative pursuits, and we got to find a way to kind of come back together here. Not necessarily become less curious, but there's a lot working against us. A lot of it cannot be detected. So, mind war, psychological warfare, my oh my.